Welcome to Wake, a cold reading of James Joyce's Finnegans Wake, just to hear it out loud. Join Toby Malone and TJ Young, along with some special friends, as we puzzle our way through what we once thought was an unreadable book to produce a surprisingly listenable podcast. It is Thursday, June 13th, 2024. It has been 28 days since we have started reading, with 74 pages complete of 628, meaning we have 554 pages left to go and are 11.78% of the way through Finnegans Wake. Welcome to episode 7 of Wake, the podcast with increasing meaning, laser-like purpose, and a solidified structure, all of which still fulfills a long-held bucket list item, reading James Joyce's Finnegans Wake out loud just once. I am your host, Toby Malone, joined as ever by one of my dearest friends in the world, the unstoppable TJ Young. TJ, what's new?
Nothing much, Toby. I am just here. I'm enjoying the sunlight coming through my window. I cleaned my office the other day. This is the best that I could possibly be right now. So
I love to hear that. And we're also delighted to share this week's reading with another one of my favorite people in the world. Professor Natalie Hoskins is a former colleague of mine who I met when we were both teaching at an unnamed university in upstate New York. But I collected Natalie and we remained in touch, and we have this wonderful friendship and we catch up all the time, and I love it. So welcome, Nat.
Delighted to be here. Thank you.
Yeah, really, really pleased to have you here. It's we'll find out what you think about this whole project as we go forward. You're our first proper guest reader. We had my daughter read a little bit, but she wasn't in the room with us. But we have a veritable parade of wonderful people coming up, and so you're leading us off. And I will say you're leading us off because you asked to be on. You're the first person who said, I'd really like to be on it. Could I be on it? So delighted. It's also a good week to, and it's also a good week to come in because we begin this episode in an auspicious week. So 3 days from now, on June 16th, it is Bloomsday. By the time this is released, that'll be a couple of weeks ago. But on June 16th, it's the annual celebration of Joyce and the indomitable Leopold Bloom and Stephen Dedalus, on the date of Bloom's epic trip around Dublin, which was also the date of Joyce's first date with his wife. So he set the entirety of Ulysses on the 16th of June, 1904. So Bloomsday was established in 1954 on the 50th anniversary, which means that this week we are celebrating the 120th anniversary of Bloomsday. So as fledgling Joyceans, it's only fitting that we celebrate Bloomsday here on Wake, and we will raise a pint of Guinness on Sunday. So happy Bloomsday to you all.
I do want to apologize to our listeners right now. I do not drink Guinness, so I will find a comparable alcoholic beverage that is not nearly as dark or thick. So,
right. Well, you like maybe a whiskey.
I'll do a whiskey. I'll do some Jameson. How about that?
Excellent. More importantly than Bloomsday is I want to turn my attention back to Natalie Hoskins. I'm really pleased you're here, but I'd love to know if you have any kind of relationship with Joyce or Finnegans Wake, like if you've read it. I mean, you're a learned professor of communications, and so does this book or author hold any kind of place in your brain?
Only now, only because of you.
Oh.
I've never read any Joyce, and I'll admit, this is being recorded, so I'm not embarrassed to admit, I have the PhD, I have tenure. I didn't really start reading literature for pleasure until the last decade.
Right.
So I was not very well read previously, and I don't think I ever read cover to cover any books while in graduate school because I was really managing a lot of different things, and the stress was real. So I did my best to skim and read chunks. No, I've not read any Joyce. I've never had any no allure to read Joyce. No literature professor has ever recommended Joyce to me, but I also, unlike you all, I haven't had many literature courses in my undergraduate studies. So No, this is entirely a lark. I thought when you told me that you were doing this, it really just sounded like a fun challenge. So I wanted to be a part of the fun.
I love it. That's great. I mean, I will say that you are in the majority of people on Earth who haven't thought about Joyce, haven't had any kind of inkling to challenge yourself in that way. So there's nothing wrong with that. And I totally agree with you. When I did my PhD, the idea of reading for fun was absolutely alien because I was reading all day trying to get the thesis finished. And so the idea of reading for pleasure was something that I really came back to, maybe not even until my 30s, I think I started to pick that up again. TJ, are you a casual reader or for
I
fun
am
reader?
now, but it takes me close to a year and a half realistically to finish any book. I have like 6 books that I'm reading at any given time, and mostly is because for work, Toby, I'm reading scripts constantly,
Right.
and because I'm reading like that, then takes that part of my brain that was creating a world and it sucked into the work again. I
Yeah.
actually started a book this past weekend and I got 75 pages in one sitting, and I was like, this is a miracle. I'm almost a third way through the book. And now I know I won't touch it again until December. So it
You've
makes
done
me,
years work of reading.
yeah.
Yeah.
The hope is to try to. I used to try to read before I went to bed, but I found out that I have astigmatism in both my eyes, and at the end of the day, my eyes just get too tired, and I will literally fall asleep, not because I want to, but because my eyes are like, no, 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 we're done. Thank you so much.
Yeah, and then if you add to that something like James Joyce, uh, and you say my brain's already tired, plus my eyes don't work, and so
The
I
printed version of melatonin.
put that on the cover. They'd probably increase their sales, but the content in this is a little bit confronting, and it's the sort of thing. I know that you've said that you've listened to sections of the podcast
Yeah.
thus far,
Yeah.
but not you're not a completist.
Yeah, I think I told you this, Toby. I played a bit of your podcast in the car when I had my 14-year-old son with me, and he told me to turn it off. It made his head hurt. And so I don't have a very dissimilar experience. I really enjoy listening to the two of you talking about the book and talking about your experience with the book. And I did very much enjoy episode 0 because I'd never heard of the book before.
Hmm.
So hearing about the background of it was really interesting. But the more that I thought about it, I just thought like this has to be a really frustrating read. Like I personally am, I don't know if I'd call it obsessed. Maybe it's a compulsion. I think it's very human of me, but I feel like my relationship with language is a relationship of desiring precision,
Mm.
and I want to understand the meaning. And if I don't understand the meaning, I get frustrated and I work even harder to try to discern the meaning. And so, just looking at this text, I feel like it's too much work. And I do understand from your background work that the like every syllable has a purpose. And you shared with me the website. What was it called? Finwake.
Finwake.com, yeah.
Who the hell has the time? Like every other word has something hyperlinked, and I thought no, that just no. So I kind of lean toward H.G. Wells's assessment of the book.
Hmm.
Like, who the hell does he think he is? Like, I only have so many hours in my life,
Yep.
and I'm not going to spend them on this text that's clearly esoteric, only meant for a few. Like a lot of, it seems like there's a lot of inside jokes or
Right.
like
Yes.
you have to be a polyglot to understand. Like this first page you're giving me today is like 90% Dutch, I think. So, like,
It's fun. I mean, don't feel afraid to lean into accents. If he really wants a dialect, he'll write
He'll
things
force
something
it on you.
phonetically, and then suddenly you're
before,
speaking in the Dutch accent. So
yeah.
yeah.
So while I find myself having this aversion to reading nonsense, because to the lay person, this is nonsense. I also am reminded of a book that I was forced to read as a graduate student. In the 90s, there was this debate, and there probably still is in the world of communication theory, but there was this debate about whether communication is intended for like trying to understand the other person's thoughts and feelings and have this kind of shared interiority, or if communication's purpose is to have coordinated action. So like John Durham Peters was the big name in 99 who wrote this book called Speaking into the Air that basically he said that dialogue is just like we're broadcasting to each other. We're not really learning much about the other. But anyway, I think of it kind of like that. Like, it's this creature of otherworldliness. I don't have to understand it, but I can appreciate it for what it is. And again, I think it's a fun challenge. Like, can I get through a page of this gobbledygook? And like join in with the two of you and feel like I've mastered this for half an hour or whatever. I think that's the allure, for sure.
The instinct for meaning is hard to kick, particularly when you are an academic. So much of our careers are spent in finding meaning and meaning making and figuring out what something means. And my background as a Shakespearean, there's only so many meanings that are. I mean, Shakespeare obviously is full of meaning as well, but it's early modern English, and so it's generally fairly easy to interpret. There's whereas this, it's telling you could interpret me if you wanted to, but you got to work for it, and who has the time to do the work? So it's
Somebody,
interesting, but
apparently.
and when I first brought this up to you, I kind of jokingly suggested that I would be leaning on your expertise as a as a professor in communications.
You scared me. I thought you were serious.
I wasn't that serious, but even the insight you've brought just now is so fantastic. It's such an interesting perspective on someone using such obtuse means to communicate meaning and to sort of flip back on and to repeat things over and over.
It makes me think, or have some empathy for our undergraduates, when I teach quantitative research methods, how they must feel when they read that quant paper for the first time. And there's jargon they don't understand. There are references to a whole canon of research that they've never been exposed to. There's so much that's just like a foreign language. And then I crack up because I remember what it was like to read these when I was just learning. And every time there's an in-text citation, these parenthetical citations, it's like it's completely disrupted my focus to encounter these. Like it's a boulder I have to climb over to get to the rest of the sentence. I mean, these pages that we're looking at today in Joyce, there's so many parenthetical additions that I think, oh my God, my undergrads, I feel so much more empathy for them because this has to be what it feels like when they're reading research methods for the first time.
The other thing I think about is I like you when I was in grad school, because so much of my grad school work was generative. When they're like, read these four things, I was like, I will read for context and not really understanding, right? But that was after years of school of being able to, your brain being able to put the participle and put the conjunction and know what the meaning of the sentence is, usually halfway through the sentence, so you can skim quickly. And this stops you from being able to do any of that.
Mm-hmm.
And so the speed of being able to read something and read a page quickly and be like, I might not have understood every syllable, but I know what the gist is. It doesn't happen here, which is just another hurdle to kind of overcome.
The best thing about it, though, I think, is that if you allow yourself to surrender to the lack of meaning and just to sort of hear these words, loyal listeners to the Wake will remember that early on we used to say that this was an unlistenable podcast of an unreadable book, which was actually a line that Natalie said to me while we were talking about this. And a friend of mine who's going to be on the podcast in a couple of weeks, strenuously objected to that because he said, no, it's not unreadable. It's full of meaning. It's eminently readable. It's the most readable book. And so I'm very interested to hear his perspective on that. But
it's an exercise in solipsism. Like your comment about how you can read it, there's meaning there, but you have to work really hard to get to it. Like, there are only a few people in the world who are willing to go that deep and spend that much time. And so it's this like reality that only exists for these people. So it really is, I don't know, self-indulgent of him to have this experiment or project that is, I mean, how long did it take him to write it? 10 years?
16 years.
16 years?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, I told Toby 2 weeks ago. I realized a word was in Zulu, but only because I'm doing Zulu on Duolingo. I was like, who would know
Who would
if
know?
this word was in Zulu
Yeah.
and
You
why?
and 100 other people.
It reminds me of that old phrase, which is the battles in academia are so tough because the stakes are so low. Because really, I mean, we're all, what are we doing? We're just unraveling things to ravel them back up again. And so that's what we're going to try to do a bit of today. We are going to be having a bit of a tag team energy for this reading. So Nat's going to join TJ and I in reading sections of the book. And we're going to use the segment breaks dictated by the scholars out there. So every time the section shifts, you not only hear the traditional transition noise, but you'll also hear a new voice. As ever, we have our tap out option for all readers. So if you get bogged down or need to stop, give us the timeout hand motion and I'll step in, or TJ will step in, someone will step in to cover. So in this section, we begin with section 1.4, and we'll be reading the first 14 pages in which we discuss yet more outrages heaped upon poor old HCE and end with a bit of lashing out. This is a
I
fun
might be the one to lash out.
Maybe, or do it in the middle. I think inevitably we're going to have a reading which includes a freak out in the middle. And if you need to,
We're just like, what's happening? What's happening?
Oh yeah, I won't edit that stuff out. So, I mean, unless you really need me to. But so this is a chapter that is kind of bringing back in some returning themes. So there's the tip that comes back from the Musi Room
My
section.
favorite scene.
Yeah, Kate Strong from the Musi Room returns and continues asking us for tips. And we also hear our fourth thunder word. The first two thunder words were actually words from across all dialects for the word thunder. The third one was replicating applause. And this one, I mean, there's a lot to dig into here, but he has a 100-letter word with all sorts of words that all mean whore or strumpet in different kinds of languages. So HCE and Joyce is really going through it here. So we'll see if we can get any of that meaning as we go. As always, we are reading from the Penguin Modern Classics edition of Finnegans Wake, published in 2000, with a foreword by Seamus Dean. Today we will be reading the first half of Chapter 1.4 from pages 75 to 90 in this edition. This is a segment that is entitled The Humphreyad 3, The Study Continues, Describing Yet More Outrages, by the Oxford World's Classic Edition of 2012, which also includes brief summaries of what is happening in each subsection, which we will address at the end of the reading. And so now, without further ado, Finnegans Wake.
As the lion in our tear garden remembers the Ninevars of his Nile, shall Ariuz forget Ariun, or Borgas the Bergams of the Marmazales from Marminiere? It may be, tots where since, full anagon in Twintig have sigil posted what in our briving bust, the besieged bedreamt him, still and solely of those Liliths, undeviled, undeveiled, which had undone him, gone for age, and knew not the watchful treachers at his wake, and theirs to stay. Fui, fui, chammermissies. Zeepy zopy, Larson lads, zingen, zingen, zingen. It may be, we most ons hasten selves to declarer it that he reglimt. Pre-saw the fields of heat and yields of wheat where corn gold is it? Shamed and shown. It may be, we haben to upseek a biddy door. Our good township's currants, want we knew it, that with his deep-seeing insight had not wishing oft been, but good time wasted, within his patriarchal shamana, Broadstein bove city, Twilby, he conscious of enemies, a King Billy white-horsed in a Finglass mill prayed, as he sat on anxious seat. Kunt, ye, neat gift may to, bout appear soft eyeballs, During that 3 and hell of hours agony of silence, ex profundis malorum, and bred with unfeigned charity that his word wounder, an eagle, an, an ingles to the teeth who, nomond Nash of Girahash, would go any old where in the weeping world on his mottled belly, the rab, the creep-ons need. For milk, music, or married mistresses. Might mercy to providential benevolences who hates prudency's astuteness, unfold into the first of a distinguished dynasty of his posteriors, black-faced Conemeras, not of the fold but elder children of his household, his most besetting of ideas, pace his 12 predominant passions, being the formation, as in more favored climes, where the meadow of honey is guest friendly and the mountain of joy receives, of a truly criminal stratum, Ham's crib cracking yeggs, thereby at last eliminating from all classes and masses, with directly derivative decasualization, Sigarius sic, vindicat urbis terrorum sicker, and so to Martha Bank to all she artered, the obedience of the citizens elp the eelth of the old.
Now goad. Let us leave theories there and return to here's here. Now here. 'Tis goad again. The teak coffin, plug glass plane fitted, feet to the east, was to turn in later, the pitly patly near the porpoise materially affecting the cause. And this, Livier, is the thing how. Any number of conservative public bodies, through a number of select and other committees having power to add to their number, before voting themselves and himself, town, port, and garrison, by a fit and proper resolution, following the court's order of the ground wet, once for all out of the ploddy existence, as a force cut. So you mate Skippy might in the cut and runner on a new pack of clerds made him, while his body still persisted, there present of protem grave in the morielta of the best slough nay pattern. Then as much in demand among Mosanesses as the Isle of Man among the Lemonphobes. Walked even. It was in a fairly fishy kettle carry, after the Fianna's foreman had taken his handful, enriched with ancient woods and dear duchy deeplands, mid which were an old knoll and a throckbeck, veiny vein her osier, and a chatty Sally with any wilt or walt who would ongle her as Isaac did to the tickle of his rod, and watch her waters of her sillying waters of, and then now brown Peter a ripple. May their quilt gild lightly over the somnolent form who for you lies his last, by the wrath of bog, like the earth's crust hun in the bed of his treblu downwoo. Best, this was to have been underground heaven or mole's paradise, which was probably as an inversion of the fallow ferris, intended to foster wheat crops and to gander up tourist trade. Its its architect, Magyar Para, Paracol, Pura Chelsea, having been obsticated lest he should petrify such a never, while the contractors, Messrs. T. A. Burkett and L. O. Twoholes, were made invulnerably venerable. First in the West are Mr. Builder, Castle Villainous, openly damned and blasted by means of a hydromine system Sawan and Belting, exploded from a reinvented TNT bombing post up ahoy of 11 and 30 wings rest. Sir Sitter, to stern board out of his aerial throw-pater, Auton Dynamon, con- contacted with the expectant minefield by tins of improved ammonium lashed to her shield-plated gunwale and fused into tri-pup cables, slipping through those and playing down from the conning tower into the ground battery fuse boxes, all differing as clocks from keys since nobody appeared to have the same time of beard. Some saying by the orlog it is Sistriges of to nine. None holding with the Rhine Vogt, it was Dane to Pfeif. He afterwards, whenever his blather began to fail off him, and his rough bark was wholly husky, and stoop by stoop he neared it. Would main spare, carefully lined, the fur concrete results with rot-proof bricks and mordant faced and fosed, and retired beneath the haptarchy of his towardness, the buke champ, byword bull and lion, the white, the wardrobe and bloodied, so encouraged. In step, all's hats believed. Additionally, additional useful counsels public, with hoofed off dealings, which were well holden of Lady Cants. To her out such was the Breeders' Union, the Guild of Merchants of the Staple, Ect AUC, to present unto him the funeral pomp. Over and above that, a stone slab with the usual Pella address of the valediction, a very foul worded instance of false meanings etymology. We have done ours Geholt with you. Here whippet, overgiven it, skadoo. But to house and all aboard shoops, show coffin, winding sheets, goodbye, bare cheps, cinery urns, lay loud blasses, snuff chest, poutine tubs, lacrymal vases, Hooden doses, reek-water beckers, break middles, zootzaks of eat lust, including up your up your helving, rook and meat the worse often, fork and pooties, and for the matter, javel all, any kind of inhumanitarian bric-a-brac for the adornment of his glass tone Honifrum would, meet these trine of condentities, naturally follow, alas, in the ordinary course, enabling the round-the-worlder wanderlings right, did such pass page turn, thank you, him him to live all safe at homely the presently days of his life of opulence, ancient decrepitude, late Lent's last lenience, till stuffering stage, wailing away the whole of the while, hypnos chilla inonion, Lethlude between explosion and re-explosion, dawn water, hunder thunder, from grow crop to megapod, embalmed and grand age, rich in death anticipated. But abide Zeit's summon serving, rise after all. Blue Blitz bolted from there, knowing the hinge worms of the hallmarks of habit habitationlessness, buried burrowing in Gehenna, to proliferate through all the utter wealth, seam by seam, shoal in shoal, and visit our upper crest, Sendera of Utilitarius, the Divine One, the hoarder hidden, propagating the Plutor popular progeny of pots and pans and pokers and puns from Bidenland and Bottonland, the spearway for the sporeway.
The other spring offensive on the heights of Abraham may have come about all quite by accidents. Forder Asunder, for Breeder Bruder had at length persuaded him to have himself be as septuply buried as the murdered Chian in Finntown, had not been 3 monads in his watery grave, what vigilantes and writings then spewed wine, pledges with ard rapple, fiddling, when putrefaction, dreyfused as ever, began to ramp. The boys are parching. A hood and winkle gave the signal, and a blessing paper freed the flood. Why did the patrician make him scares with his gruntons? Because the Druven were muscating at the door. From both Celtiberian camps, granting at the onset for the sake of argument that men on the two sides in New South Ireland and Vatira Ulad, Bloomin and Pillfaces, duting the ferment with the Pope and or on the Pope, had Moors or lets, grant ideas, grunted. All conditions, poor cons and divers more, each, of course, on the purely defensive, since the Eternals were alwise on their side every time, were drawn towards their Bologna's black bottom, once wolves' white's waltz. Ho be a ho, how be crime, be cursed, kissed, and be dumb to it. Some for want of proper feeding in youth, others already caught in the honourable act of slicing careers for family and carvers in conjunction, and if emaciated enough, the person garroted may have suggested to whomever he took the ham of, the plain being involved in darkness, low cirque waggery, nay, even the old first wugger of himself in the flesh, Wigissimus incarnadined, when false-sighted by the if such he was bully on the hill, for there had circulated freely, fairly among his opposition the feeling that in so hibernating Massa Iwaka, who previous to that demid-changed life, had been known of balm McIdle days, Cook said, between soups and savours, to get outside his own length of rainbow trout and tarts at a tarn as no man of woman born, nay, could, like this great crested brebe, devour his 70 of roach per life day, aye, and as many minnow a minute, the big mix made gibbet choke him, was, like the salmon of his ladder leap, all this time of totality, secretly and by suckage feeing on his own misplaced fat. Ladies did not disdain those pagan iron times of the first city, called after the ugliest Danadoon, when Frond was a friend ineen to carry as earwigs do their dead, their soil to the earth ball, where indeed we shall calm decline, our legacy unknown. Venuses were gigglibity tempetrix, Vulcans guffawably eruptious, and the whole wives' world frock full of fickles. Fact, any human in yon you liked any ear noon or efter would take her bare godkin out, or an even pair of hem, le god, lugadoo, and prettily pray with him, or with an M even, every he to her taste, long for luck, tapet and tape petter, and take pettest of all, tip. Wells she'd woo and will she'd win, but how the dear knowed where she'd marry, arbour, bucket room, caravan, ditch, coach, carriage, wheelbarrow, dung cart. Kate Strong, a widow. Tip, tip. She pulls a lane picture for us in a dreario-drama setting, glowing and very visual, of old Dumpland as she knows it, a home-like cottage of Elvenstone, with droppings of biddies, stink-end pushies, moggies duggies, rotten witcher wobbles, festering rubbages, and beggars' bullets, if not worse, sending salmofarious germs in gleefully through the smithereen panes. Widow Strong, then, as her weaker had turned him to the wall, tip, 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 did most all the scavenging from good King Hamlow's golden Dane through her lean besom, clean but sparingly, and her bare statement reads that, there being no macadamized sidetracks on those old necropolitan nights in, barring a footbatter, Bryant's Causeway, bordered with speedwell, white clover, and sorrel a wood-nose, which left off being beaten where the plaintiff was struck, she left down as scavengers, who will be scavengers must. Her filth dump near the Serpentine in Fornix Park, at her time called Finewell's Keepsaker, but later tab-tossed Pat's Purged, that Dangerfield circling Butcher's Wood, where Firewalker O'Flaherty engaged a nutter of Castle Mallards, and for Archer stuns Turk, all over which fossil footprints, boot marks, finger signs, elbow dints, breech bowls, ASO, were all successively traced of a most involving description. What subtler time-place of the Weald than such wolf's belly castrament to will hide a Liber from Thursman's brandy hands, or a love letter, lostfully hers, that would be lust on Mar, than when ructions endured, than here where race began, and by four hands of forethought the first babe of reconcilement is laid in its last cradle of Hume, sweet Hume. Give over it, and no more of it. So pass the pick for child's sake, O men. For here all higher sprack for Christians, as for propaganda fiddies, and his nuptial eagles sharp their beaks of prey, and every mortal man of us, poem by poem, falls back into this terran. As it was, let it be, says he. And it is as though where Agni araflammed and Mithra monished, and Shiva slew as Maya Mutras the abluvial waters of our no-archic memory withdrew, windingly go harksome to some hasty swasty timberman torch priest flame in flam, the ward of the wind that lightened the fire that lay in the wood that Jove bolt at his rude word. Posidonius, O fluctuary, lave that bloody stone as it is. What are you doing, you dirty minx, and his big tree block way up your path? Slip around, you, by the rare of the ministers, and you, take that barrel back where you got it, McShane's, and go the way of your old one went, Hatchettsbury Road. And gish, how they gushed away, the penny fares, a whole school for scamper, with their sashes flying shish behind them, all the little pearly pets. Issy La Chapelle, any Lucans, please? Yes, the viability of Vicinals, if invisible, is invincible, and we are not trespassing on his corns either. Look at all the plotch, Fluminian. If this was Hannibal's walk, it was Hercules' work, and 100,000 of the unemancipated slaved the way. The mausoleum lies behind us, O Agidasta, multipopuli pater, and there are milestones in their cheed milias faltering along the trains track by Brahm and Anton Hermes, per omnibus secula secularum, amalm. But the past has made us this present of the Herode. So more Boher O'Connell, though rainy hidden your rhino hide. And if he's not a Romeo, you may scallop your hat. We're up under in the fane of St. Fiacre. Halt!
It was hard by the house there, plainly on this dissoluded and a buchan cold spot. Rupestric then, resurfaced that now is, that lutral sold if loutral bought, in the saddle of the Brennans, now Malpa Plus, Pass. Versts and versts from true civilization, not where his dreams top their troms halt. Beneath there. But where live land yon tide mirrored with the wild, saltly with flood, that the attackler, a Kropatkin, though under medium and between colors with truly native pluck, engaged the adversary, who had more in his eye than was less to his leg, but whom for plunder's sake he mistook in the heavy rain to be Oglethorpe, or some other Ginkus, Parr apparently, to whom the head and heelless chickens stag bore some Michelangelo-esque resemblance, making use of sacrilegious languages to the defect that he would challenge their hemispheres to exterminate them, but he would canonize the life out of him and lay him out contritely as smart as the had his night prayers said. 3 Patrick Noxters and a couplet of Hell Murrays. Tout est sacré pour un sacreur, femme à barbe ou homme nourrice. At the same time, so as to plug well, let the blooby whale goats out of him, catching holst of an oblong bar he had and with which he usually broke furnitures. He rose the stick at him. The border incident repeated itself. The pair, whether there they were, Nipoluono, engaging, Wailing Tao, or de Raskias trying to reconnoiter the General Bukalev, man may not say, struggled apparently for some considerable time, the cradle rocking equally to one and oppositely from the other in its law of capture and recapture. Under the all-in rules about the book safe, fighting like Purpletop and Tipperary swayed, sacramented Servius of the divine zeal. And in the course of their tussle, the taller man, who'd opened his bully bowl to beg, said to the miner who was carrying the worm, a handy term for the portable distillery, which consisted of 3 vats, 2 jars, and several bottles, though we purposefully say nothing of the stiff, both parties having an interest in the spirits. "Let me go, Pauthine! I hardly knew ye." Later on, after the celestial pause for refreshment, the same man or a different and younger him of the same ham asked in the vermicular with a very ugly chew-chin grin, "Was 6 victolios, 15 pigeon, take ye off of you? Tell he me, stolong fella, by picky-pocky 10 to foul months behind aside." There were some further call it a banter and severe tries to convert for the best part of an hour, and now a woden affair in the shape of a Webley. We at once recognize our old friend Ned, of so many ill or temperate letters, fell from the intruder who, at stuck as that cat to that mouse in that tube of that Christchurch organ, did the image of girl cloud pensive flout above them light young charm in ribbons and pigtail? Whereupon became friendly, and saying not his shirt to tear, to no wanted, laying all joking and knob carries aside. If his change companion, who stuck still to the invention of his strong box, with a tenacity corroborating their mutual tenatorial rights, happened to have the loose change of a 10-pound crickler about him at the moment, addling that hap so, he would pay him back the 6 fix odd. Do you see? Out of that for what was taken on the man of samples last Uni or July. Do you follow me, Cap'n? To this the other, Billy with the bull, who'd mummed and mauled up to that, for he was hesitancy carried to excelsicism, rather amusedly replied, "Woo woo! Would you be would you be grossly surprised, Till, to learn that, as it so happens, I honestly have not such a thing as the least chance of a tin-pan crackler anywhere about me at the present moment. But I believe I can see my way, as you suggest, it being Yuletide or Judenfest, as it's mad nuts, son, for you when it's hatter's hares, mon, for me, to advance you something like 4 and 7 pence between hopping and trapping, which you might just as well have, boy Bacchus, to buy JJ and S with." There was a minute's silence before memory's fires rekindling, and then, hard alive, which at very first wind of gay gay, and Whiskwig's Wick's ears pricked up, the starving gunman, strike him pink, became strangely calm and forthright, swear by all his lards porcenal that the thorn tree of Sheol might ramify up his Sheophon to the lux appointlex, but he would go good to him sometime, marks my word for it chip off the old flint, and the Nictian glossary which purveys a prioric roots for a posteriorius tongues. This is nat language at any sense of the world, and one might as fairly go and kish his sprogs as fail to certify whether the war trophy alluded at some lives earlier was that something like a jug to what a cock-table, and remarksing in languidoily, seemingly much more highly pleased than tongue could tell at this opening of a lifetime, and the foretastes of the Dunbank pearl mothers and the boy, to wash down which he would feed to himself and the ruad cow at Talacht, and then in the good woman at Ringsend, and after her in at Conway's Inn, and at Blackrock, and first to fall, cursed be all, where appetite would keenest be at funeral fair or fun fain real, Adam and Eve's in Quaintity Street by the grace of gamey Queen Tailty. Her will and testament. You stunning little South Downer, I'd know you anywhere, to Claney. Let me truthfully tell you in or out of the lexinction of life, and who the hell else be your Blanche Patch on the bony part. Goal ball I've struck this daylight dilate, night of nights by golly. My hat, you have some bully German grit, sundowner. He spud in his Faust accent. He toped the raw best, pardon. He poked his pick, a tip is a tap, and he tucked his friend's leave. And with French hen, or the portfolio of hastes and leisures, about to continue that, the queer mixture exchanged the packs in embrace, or pogue, hue, Pooksy, as practiced between brothers of the same breast, Hililulia, Kililulia, Allen law, and having ratified before the god of the day their Torgan truce, which belittlers have schmal called the treating to cognac. Turning his fez, menial straight, in the direction of Moscas, he first got rid of a few Mitz-Millers and Hurushoes and levanted off with tubular turbulence at a bull's run over the Aspach Bridge, spitting his teeth on roofs, with the 7 and 4 endangled in Donegeld and their humoral hurlbat, or other uncertain weapon of lingam vitae, but so ever more ruminescent of toboggan poop, picked up to keep, I'm so mature, picked up to keep some crowd plucking appointment with some rival Rialtos anywhere between Peerage and the Little Horn, while this poor Delaney, who they left along with a Confederate fender behind and who, albeit balls bluffed, bore up wonderfully wonder, all of it with a whole number of plume-sized contusiums, plus a la bruised coccyx all over him, reported the occurrence in the best way he could to the flabbergaze of the whole lab, giving the patty banners the military salute. As for his excellencies, the O'Daffy, in justifiable hope that in Nobiloraman review of the hugely satisfactory conclusium of their negotiations and the juggle monkeyish agreement, Dean derivative, some lotion or foremention of poppy heads would be generously exhibited to the parts. At the nearest watch house in Vicar Lane, the white ground of his face all covered with diagonally Red Cross non-fatal mammalian blood as proof positive of the seriousness of his character and that he was bleeding in self-defiance. Stanch it. From the nostrils, lips, pavilion, and palate, while some of his hitter's hairs had been pulled off his Knut's head by Colt, though otherwise his all-round health appeared to be middling along, as it proved most fortunate that not one of the 206 bones and 501 muscles in his corso was whit the worse for her whacking. Herr who? Now then, leaving clashing ash, brawn and muscle, and brass made to oust earth and born, and rock crystal to wreck isinglass, but worming along gradually for our savings, back towards mother waters, so many miles from Bank and Dublin Stone, Olympiading even till the 11th dynasty, to reach that thuddy sickened Hamlaugh, and to the question of Boney's unlawfully obtaining a pierced paraflam and claptrap fireguard, there crops out the still more salient point of the politish leanings and town pursuits of our forebearer, Eldon de Dunilly. May his ship ficht stick in the bottle of the river, and all his cruisers stock locked in the burl of the seas, who, when within the black of your toenail, sir, of being mistakenly ambushed by one of the Uda Vedas, and as close as made no matter, ma'am, to being kyoed offhand when the Hyungono heckler with the Peter Painter wanted to hole him was consistently practicing the first of the primary and imprescriptible liberties of the Pacific subject by circulating "Be British, boys, to your belly bone and chuck a chum a chance" alongst one of our unprohibited cemetery through farts, open to buggy and bike to walk Wellington Park Road with curb or Quaker's quack nostrum under his oxter and his alpenstock in his red hand. A highly commendable exercise, or number 2 of our acta legitima plebea. On the brink, beware to balk a man at his will, of taking place upon a public seat to what? Bear by butts. Most easterly, but all goes west, of Blackpool bridges, as a public protest and natural-like vice, without intent to annoy either, being praised good thankfully for the wrath-bereaved ring-dove and the fear-stung boa constrictor, and all the more right jolly well pleased, which he was, at having other people's weather.
But to return to the Atlantic and the Venetia proper, as if that were not to be enough for anyone, but little headway, if any, was made in solving the was not to be crime conundrum when a child of Mam, Festy King, of a family long and honorably associated with the tar and feather industries, who gave an address in old Plamanchi, Mayo of the Saxons, in the heart of the foul-famed Pothin district, was subsequently hauled up to the Old Bailey on the calends of Mars, under the incompatibly framed indictment of both the counts, from which uh, equinoxy Equinox's points of view, the one fellow's fetch being the other fellow's person, that is to see, flying cushats out of the overalls and making fesses immodest his forces on the field. Oh yeah, when the prisoner, soaked and methylated, appeared in dry dock, apparently Ambrosia realized, like Kara's corduroy caricature, wearing, besides stains, rents and patches, his fight shirt, straw braces, sou'wester, and the policeman's corkscrew trousers, all out to be all out of the true, as he had purposely torn up his Chitramanx bespokes in the Mamertine, deposing for his exution of all the flourish of the sparse and the royal Irish vocabulary, how the whole Pater-Jag-Martin Trippelzeit Zoot, and all the suffet of copperas had fallen off him quartz unaccountably like the crystallizations of Alm on Evan, while he was trying for it to stick fire to himself. Infected he was dripping as he found upon stripping for a pipkin of malt, as he feared the cooled rain. It was attempted by the crown, P.C. Robert, to show the king Elos Crowbar, once known as Malachi, impersonating a climbing boy, rubbed some pixies of any luvia Peatsmore o'er his face, plucks and pusses with a clentophore as the best means of disguising himself, and was to the middle white fair and mud for on a Thursday fests of Peeler and Polly, under the ill-assumed names of Ty King Fest and Rab Wark, picked by him and Anthony out of a telephone book, allegedly with a pedigreed pig, unlicensed, and a hyacinth. There were they were on that sea by the plain of Ear 999 years, and they never cried crack or ceased for regular paddy wicking till that they landed their two and the trifling selves at mass camel and ass, grey beard and suckling, priest and pauper, Mart Martron and Mary Meg, with the meddling of a mudstorm. The gathering, convening of the Irish agricultural and prepastoral organists organizations to help the Irish muck to look his brother Dane in the face and attend thanks to Larry by large numbers. The Christies and Jews totems, to spite of the divulge, distinctly of a scattery kind, when the bally bricken he would get no good of, after cock of the walking, through a few fancy fought mains, ate some of the doorweg, the picky later selling the gentleman ratepayer because she, Francie's sister, that is to say, ate the whole side of his, the animal's, sty on a struggle street, quae stra troia, in order to pay off hiss or lick 6 doubloons, 15 ares of his, the villain's not the rumbler's rent.
Remarkable evidence was given, anon, by an eye, ear, nose, and throat witness, whom Wesleyan chapel-goers suspected of being a plain-clothes priest W.P., situate at Null Null Medical Square, who, upon letting down his rice and peace-green cover-disc, and having been sullenly cautioned against yawning while being grilled, smiled. He had a one-bumper at parting from Mrs. Mulroe in the morning, and stated to his elicitor under his Morse must accents, God bless, that he slept with the bona fides and that he would be there to remember the filth of November, hatternaring rowdy-o, which, with the jubilees of Juno and the dates of old langxiety, was going, please the rainmaker, to descends within the ephemerides of profane history, all one with Tournay, Yestersley, and Temera, and one thing which would strike a person of such sorely tried observational powers as Sam, him, and Moffat, though theirs not to reason why. The striking thing about it was that he was petrified to see, hear, taste, and smell, as his time of night, how Hyacinth O'Donnell, B.A., described in the calendar as a mixer and word painter, with part of a civis spacem, Gael tact for dung fork, on the fair green at the hour of 24 o'clock sought, the bully Cassidy of the Friedhofer, to sack, sock, stab, and slaughter single-handed another two of the old kings, Gush MacHale and Roaring O'Crian Jr., both changelings, unlocalized, of no address and in non-communicables, between him and whom, ever since wallops before the mise of Lewes, bad blood existed on the ground of the Boer's trespass on the bull, or because he first parted his polar beaver hair in two ways, or because they were creep-foxed and grouse suppers over a nippy in noveletta, or because they could not say meese, mutant daft, meath. The litigants, he said, local Kongsmen and Donalds, kings of the Arons and Dalkeys, kings of Mud and Tory, even the goat king of Kilorglin, were egged on by their supporters in the shape of better women with bowstrung hair, of Carthaginian ruddiness, waving crimson petties and screaming from Isod's tower top. There was cries from the thick sets in court and from the MacDublins on the Bow and the Breen of "Mind the bank from Banagher, mixer! Produce O'Donnell! Aye, exhibit his relics! Buh! Use the tongue more! Give the lip less!" But it oozed out in Dead Man's Dark Scenery Court through cross-examination of the case-hardened testis that when and where that knife of knives the tree-partied ambush was laid, roughly spouting around half hours twixt ducks in dawn, by water hoses metal Europe time, near stop and think, high chief ever virens, and only a fall tree in all the land. There was not as much light from the widowed moon as would bedim a child's altar. The mixer, accordingly, was bluntly broached, and in the best basil to boot, as to whether he was one of these lucky cocks for whom the audible, visible, nosable, edible world existed. That he was only too cognitively, cogitably sure of it, because living, loving, breathing, and sleeping pancreates, as he most significantly did, whenever he thought he heard, he saw, he felt, he made a bell clipper, 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 clipper. Whether he was practically sure, too, of his lugs and trues names in this king and blouseman business, that he was prediculously so. Certified? As could be. Be lying? Ad the loney I will. It was morbus o somebody. A quite. Thursday's son, a satyr in weddings. And how did the green-eyed mister arrive at the BA? That it was like his pole. A cross-grained trapper with murty odd ogs, orflated aries, inclinine nays, and a twitcherous mouth, he would be. Who kid bit you at to a tenderfill when assailed? Belly or a jobber? Some major bar too? Ingains. And with tumultuous legs, redipnomitated Helmingham, Urchinwine, Rutter, Egbert, Cromwell, Odin, Maximus, Esme, Saxon, Isa, Vercingetorix, Ethel, Wolf, Ruprecht, Idweller, Bentley, Osmond, Dysart, Yggdrasil, man? Holy Saint Eiffel, the very phoenix! It was Chudley Magnol once more between the Defidates and the dumb scene. The two child spies were preasing him Auser the Devolog, but the renting of his rock was from the three wicked Vancouver's forests bent down at wits. Art how sure? You biddy, come Bilom comes. One of the Oxmen's thingabosses, Havad. And had he been refrexed by the founts of bounty playing there is a pain Ireland in long googling barrel. A loss of Ludeward and a lack of Sire Philip, a Sergenet Sherahone, could suck more gargling bubbles out of the five lamps in Porteran's praise. Wurgling and Mary's, as whose wouldn't, laving his leaf time in Blackpool. But of course, he could call himself Tem, too, if he had time to. But he could, any time, when he pleased, when and place. A stoker temptated by eavesdripping against the driver who was a witness as well. Sacred avatar, how the devil did they guess it? Two dream-yums in one drome-yum? Yes, no, and no error. And both as like as a jewel of lentils? Precisely. So he was pelted out of the coram populo, was he? Be the powers that be, he was. The prince in principle should not expose his person. Machiavel, Ruskiman, camarade, sooner Galwegian would he say. Not unintoxicated, fair witness. Drunk as a fish-up. Asked to whether she minded whither he smooked. Not if he barked into flames. And then his ejaculations to the cross-can lawn, Cossa. It was Curso on Cursor again. The gracious miss were not doubt sensible how Yellowatty on the forks was altered. That she easily was, o'dowed me not. As to his religion, if any, it was the C.U. Sunday sort. Exactly what he meant by the pederast prig. Be Jacobs just a gent who prayed his Lent. And if middle-class Portivorius was a usual beast, by night as usual as a vomit to a shorn man. If he had Rognerized their Gjorts marshals, day nays they had. Lindondelly Coker Skilly's spell me gart without a gate. Hardly a drope. The grazing rights, Mrs. Magistra Martinetta, expired with the expiry of Goat's sire, if they were not mistaken. That he exactly could not tell the worshipfuls, but his mother and waiters had the recipes for the price of the coffin, and that he was there to tell them that herself was a velocipede that could tell them Kit-Kat. A Mandarin tongue is a pounderin jowl, farther order about the matters of pronunciation. Distributing air endings, and if we recommends, quare hircum? No answer. Unde gentium fe? No, Are you not danzeling on the age of a volcano? Sir, I am deed. And how old of him? He was interdant to study Pulu, which was meant in a shirt of two shifts, macogramade or up fin tree-hatted ladder, that a head in thighs under a bush at the sun-face would bait a serpent to a mill race through the heather. Arm-bird coloured deaf-dumb ethnic fort, perhaps. Sure, and glomps handy jottle feason as well. Hokey Jasons, then, in a pidgeeses, on a pontiff's order as sure as theirs, an ital on atac. As a gololi bit to Joss, Lily and Tululi. But why this hanko chaff, and whence this second tone, son yet son? He had the kowtow in his bucks's flay of flace. So this that Solier sistra, setting odds evens at defiance, took the lord from labouriter. What displaced Tob, Dilk, and Halley? had not been greatly in love with the game, and changing the vendors from the King's Head to the Republican's Arms, as to the pugnacities evinced from a flagfall to antipost during the effrays round Father Time's Beckside, and the regents in the Plainstown reigning, with the Skiddy Stars and the Morecurne wind-up, how they appealed to him then, that it was Wildfire's night on all the Betty Gallaghers. Mick Michael's swords, shrieking mechs through all the Wilkinses and Necker Nicholas's toasting forks, pricking prongs up the tunny bladders. Let there be fight, and there was fought. On the site of the Angels, you said. Guinea's Gap, he said, between what they said and the Pussykitties. In the middle of the garth, then? That they mustn't touch it. The devoted couple was or were only two disappointed solicitresses on the job of the unfortunate class on Saturn's mountain fort. That was about it, ja. And Camillus then said to Gemellus, I should know you, parfaitly. And Gemellus then said to Camillus, yes, your brother, absolutely. And if it was all about that, egregious sir, about that and the other, if he was not alluding to the hole in the wall, that he was when he was not alluding from the whole of the woman. Briefly, how such beginner finally struck him now, like the crack that bruck the bank in Multifarnham. Whether he fell in with what they meant, cursed that he suppoxed he did. Dos Thoris Stormers Thom, the Ruddercrass Rotter in Robruckdom, Sir Topical and Subhuman, if it was, in Yapanoi's language, ach, bad clap, ooh, Ogs and oars with Ryan Oakley, and to put it terchinly, we wrong? Shocking! Such as Turley pierced our realies that he might never that night, tryly and rurally. Blad Yuchfowl, Morkelenberg, Wura, Hora, Escorta, Strumpa, Porna, Nelly, Coxa, Patti, Patta, Putta, Patter, Trip, Paka, Panisek. Eh? You have it. All right.
Goodness gracious.
Oh, man.
I'm so glad that you told us what that thunder word meant, because I'm not gonna lie. The whole time we've been reading this, I'm like, Joyce is a little dirty. Like, there's some dirty stuff happening here. Like, I was like, this dude is looking at this lady's painting house and then touching it. I don't. Joyce, like,
Yeah, when I read after you mentioned H.G. Wells, I read that letter. Wells made a comment in his letter about how like low morals Joyce had, and I think he actually uses the C word. Yeah, he said, you may believe in chastity, purity, and the personal God. That is why you are always breaking out into cries of and hell. So I do think that he's dirty and wow.
There's a lot in there. So that was the first half of chapter 1-4 from Finnegans Wake. And thank you to Nat for your excellent interpretation. How was it for you reading this stuff?
It was as fun as I predicted. I very much enjoyed the challenge. And I'm not going to lie, it's a little frustrating not to be able to read something perfectly. That's the perfectionist in me. So I did kind of repeat words and try again a few times more than I think that you both do. So I think that was an interesting difference. But I did find myself rooting for you both when you were reading. I was like, you got this. Yes. Oh, there you go. And so I enjoyed having the text in front of me and reading along, because there's so much that if you see it, it actually does make sense. On the other hand, there's a lot that if you hear it out loud, I think that it fits even better. Like there was the one part where I think, Toby, you read, asked to whether she minded whether he smoked, not if he barks into phlegms. I think reading that, because it's spelled Phlegms, phlegm.
Yes.
When you read it aloud, it gave it life that I don't I don't think it would have had in my own head reading it to myself.
Yeah, it's an interesting response. Do you mind if I smoke? Not if you burst into flames.
Yeah.
So good.
Yeah, and again, that's interesting because I was purely focusing on the sound of it,
Mm-hmm.
right? And like I get that it was burst into flames, but it wasn't. I wasn't really connecting the meanings from sentence to sentence. I was really only like, oh, haha, it looks like bark and phlegm, but he's saying burst into flames with
Right.
this really rich accent that the character has. Yeah, so it's very interesting reading while listening, reading, seeing it in front of me, hearing it out loud. Yeah.
Well, it just makes it very clear that reading it silently to yourself alone is not the way to go about this book. And we're making it fairly clear that
Yeah.
there are a lot of ways in.
I agree there's not one right way, but I feel like I would enjoy it more listening while reading along.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm glad that you said the thing about like stopping and starting, because it was the word equinoxical. I was like, I've never seen the word equinox used in that way. And my brain was like, wait. And instantly I was like, I want to parse out this meaning. And it obviously means like they're on two different sides of the argument, but I've just never seen it used that way. And like you said, it's one of those things where you're like, I want to understand right now.
Mm-hmm.
And I
Yeah.
want to understand the use of it right now.
Yeah. The
But
meaning is hard to give up. But you reminded me of something I experienced. There, each of us had this happen, but so I'm not going to call you out. I'm going to refer to myself. There was a word. It was one of those portmanteau words where it
yeah,
was like English words that were stitched together. And when I encountered it, my instinct was it's not a real word, so I'm going to read it like it's not. And it was boa constrictor.
Right.
And so I started it like boa con.
yeah.
And I thought, damn it, Joyce. Like I expect everything to be so ridiculous that even the real words aren't
They're hard. Yeah, they trip you up.
registering. Mhm.
And I think this very much his intention is to keep saying that language is only a step away from grunting. It's just, even words that we know, if you take the spaces out between them, you've got to really negotiate what that means. So
I
Oh,
do.
we've got to negotiate what it means every day, every second that we try to communicate with each other. I mean, just, I don't know about you all, but in a relationship, when you're trying to make sense in a conflict and every little word and meaning matters, it's so frustrating how we misuse language, how we confuse language, and how we depend on it so direly. Um, yeah, I think that it's a good reminder that it can be an impediment to our ability to actually experience something.
yes. Yeah, and in this is reminding you that words, the subtext to words is essentially bottomless, and it can mean any number of different things to any
Mhm.
number of different people, depending on your education, depending on your context, depending on who's speaking. And by removing the meaning from the words, he reminds us that it doesn't just have one meaning; it has all the meanings, depending on how you angle it. So it's a really fascinating thing where maybe the most terrifying thing your partner can say to you is fine.
Oh, the
Because
word
he
with
like
infinite interpretations.
exactly because literally it's everything's fine, but it means
It's not.
anything but that.
Mm. Yeah, I mean, literally, doesn't it mean of high quality or
Sure.
Yeah.
refinement?
Yeah.
So it's
It,
never
it,
really just fine.
Yeah, that's right.
Not in my
yeah.
house, at least.
There were a couple things that I thought of in this, and Natalie, you pointed this out. Is that I was like, the number of times that words are put together in the English language, and our tongues just keep going and just say the next word, and so you have to stop yourself and like reconfigure what the actual syllable is happening. And I was like, wouldn't it be the greatest troll of all time if just like smack dab in the middle of this novel, 300 pages from now, it's just like a normal chapter. Like he's just like, here you go. Here's 5 pages that you can just like take in, and then here we go again. I'd lose it. I think that would be amazing. But throughout all of it, I also think that it was really a lot of fun. The more we sit with the book, the more I am starting to pick up where he lays down threads of narrative and how he lays them down. So I'm starting to understand the form of the book. And then there are times when I'm like, did I forget how to read? Or do I just want to read a Dr. Seuss book so I can be like, I know. There's a couple movies I've watched that way, and I'm like, I forgot how to watch a movie. I guess I don't know anything about anything.
It's funny you mentioned Dr. Seuss because I think Dr. Seuss is kind of gibberish too.
Oh yeah,
I
yeah.
mean, far more simplistic and not with nearly as much context needed, but you gotta you gotta go out on a limb pronouncing Dr.
Sometimes you're like, Starbelly snitches, sure, I guess. Like,
Yeah, and then he really, I love how he just throws us for loops when we think we know what he's doing. So on page 76, I love that moment in the first paragraph where he says, Sigarius, sick. And you go, okay, I know what you're doing there by saying sick, because you mean to say I'm retaining the error. And then vindicat urbis terrorism, sicker. And so shifting it over from a grammar note to a moment of commentary.
It's a pun, right?
Yeah, and so he's a fairly mischievous kind of writer. I think he really likes to unravel what a lot of these things are doing. I appreciated the return of Kate Strong and her tips, tip,
asking for
give me some money. So good, and then throughout that Kate Strong section, Shakespeare comes and goes, all sorts of different things. Hamlet is in there. Romeo and Juliet is referenced, and Macbeth, of course, as well. He's also
That section had one of my favorite lines. They're soiled to the earth ball, where in death we shall calm decline, our legacy unknown. I was like, that's great.
Yeah.
Every once in a while, I'm just like, okay. Yeah, and the nod towards other religions' deities, Agni, Shiva, Mithra. I was like, if this is Hannibal's walk, it was Hercules' work. This is also just great.
Yeah. Yeah, I love the introduction of Festy King, who is a bit of a rascal. The first thing we hear about him is that he is of a family long and honorably associated with the tar and feather industries.
Yeah.
Like how much more succinct does someone need to get to say, oh, his whole family are crooks, continually being tarred and feathered. Yeah, lots of really fun things, and with an unlicensed pedigree pig. Didn't you once have an unlicensed pedigree pig, TJ?
I've had a total of 4 pigs in my life. None of them were licensed pedigree.
Or pedigree.
None of them were. 2 of them were licensed. The other 2 were just snuck in.
Right. So, in terms of the reading, TJ, did you find that these shorter... So this is the first time we've done these shorter sections where we've done 2-3 pages at a time as opposed to longer. So did you find that shifted your way of reading?
I think it allowed me to... Because there's so much value in being able to read it as you're listening. And I think that it allowed for that to happen more often, right? I think one of the things I missed last time when I was reading a larger section was like, oh, I missed just listening and finding the nuggets in the text. Because when you're reading it, you're like, sure, just keep going, right?
Right.
So I thought that was fun, and being able to, and I realized I hopped right back into that place of listener, like right after my last section. I don't. You were looking down because you were reading, because that makes sense. But I like had to pull away from the mic because I was laughing so hard at remarkable evidence was given anon by an eye, ear, nose, and throat witness. Like that's hilarious, right? But I think that if I was reading that, I would have not. It would have been funny, but it wouldn't have hit me. You know what I mean?
Yeah, it comes at you fast. All of these words as they come up, they pop up, and then you say it, and you go, oh, "That was a joke." Oh, it's behind me already.
Yeah, but if you're able to listen, you're able to catch all the jokes a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, obviously there'd be a benefit to rehearsal to be able to sort of tease those things out and to find all the different things. But
that's why there's at least 2 of us at all times to tease it out for the other person.
That's right. Yeah. And there are things that we miss, and there are things that the reader doesn't hear, but the listener does. And
yeah. I am more and more in favor of And maybe we can get a sponsorship by Penguin so that way people can click a link and buy the book. But I am more and more in favor of people going through and reading it while it's read out loud. Because even just the mastery and the wordplay of when I first started, let us leave theories there and return to here's here, now here. And, and seeing it laid out on the page and also hearing it, it just amplifies the experience.
Yeah.
Well, sure. When you have homonyms, you don't know unless you see it.
Yeah. So, Penguin, if you want to sponsor Wake,
a sound investment, I endorse it.
See, look, we're almost there. We're almost done with our ad read. So,
so I want to admit my failing or ignorance. I don't have any grasp on the plot. So reading, listening, zero. Like
you're so safe.
I've no idea what's happening here. But I wondered that, like, there was a part where on page 89 where I wrote, "Is he drunk?" So is that something that happens a lot where the character is drunk and so the words are written in such a way that it sounds okay? You're nodding your heads.
There's a lot of phonetic things that are in there, and really encouraging you to read it in a certain kind of way. And so Festy King is on trial, and so he's being questioned. And I feel as though, if again with some rehearsal, with some preparation, putting on interesting voices to designate the different people who are questioning him might really illuminate differently. But
For sure.
But I think, a big part of this, I know that when I sent you the pages a few days ago, you had a look through, whereas TJ and I haven't looked even once at any of these things. I glanced through to see if there's anything interesting happening with the typography, but otherwise I'm just like, whatever, let's just do it, do it live. You do miss a lot of stuff, but then I find that you can pick things. I think it's practice. I think it's you get used to the tone and the process. But
if it makes you feel any better, we're 90 pages in, and all I'm like is HCE was sleeping around and he's hidden a coffin, and everyone's mad at him. That's like the entirety of what I've gotten.
Yeah. Although it's mostly scurrilous rumor at the moment.
I think right now everyone's like, ooh.
Yeah, and ALP is going to show up next chapter and defend him. So so HCE is not done yet.
So yeah, we're 90 pages in, and that's what I've picked up. And then the other thing I've picked up is that there was a tour guide taking us around asking us for money, and every once in a while we get these little side stories of these people who are also not great. To kind of, it's like, no, nobody's great. Like, how dare you do this to ACE when like this person over here is actually terrible. So again, I can't tell you who is saying it about HCE. I couldn't tell you. If you asked me, where are they right now? I'd be like, that's a great question.
Well, I feel affirmed and validated. Thank you.
But I think it's also a big part of it is that where are they? I think they're everywhere and they're nowhere.
Yeah.
And they are wherever you decide they are. And the meaning is infinite in all of these things. And so I think there's a big reason why he doesn't let us get comfortable, because there's no end to the number of interpretations that you can place. And any kind of interpretation that you had is just as valid as the interpretation that Joyce intended. So that's what's really fascinating about it all, including the thunder word, the 100-letter thunder word, talking all about strumpets. And
well, I looked up in my Google Translate the French that I read on page 81.
Mm-hmm.
It translates in English to "all is sacred for a priest, bearded woman, or nanny." So even though we may interpret that infinitely, I wonder if there's even an idiomatic meaning or something like. Tell I'm frustrated. Like, I want to know.
Yeah, but it's also fascinating to think that a phrase like that, when translated in English, is funny, but when said in French, is beautiful. And we hear the words said, and we're like, "Oh, that's such a beautiful phrase. What does it mean?" That's not the point. The point is the sound of the words, where a horrible phrase said in French or Italian is poetic. I mean, that's why they're the romance languages. They're the language that we like to hear. So
Yeah.
It's like I was listening to a song in Spanish. It was a pop song in Spanish, and I asked Taylor to translate it for me. And I was like, "What are they saying?" He's like, "They're saying the cow, the cow, the cow's over there. Look at the cow. The cow's over there." And I was all like, "Oh, great."
You wish you could unask it.
Yeah.
Us.
We usually spend some time with the Oxford World Classics edition. So, Nat, you were talking a little bit about not being sure where we are. Let's see what the Oxford World Classics says about what's happening in each of these sections. So, this is, again, 1-4, Humphrey ad 3. The study continues describing yet more outrages. So, from the beginning of the chapter, from page 75 to 76.9, we hear HCE's eugenic thoughts prompted by his criminal assailant. From 76.10 to 78.14, it's HCE's hiding place / coffin and his resurrection. 78.15 to 81.11, how people were drawn into the assault, gender relations, Kate Strong and street rubbish. That's so lots of 81.12 to 85.19, details of an assault, a request for money, a long struggle, a deal, the aftermath. So action-packed section there of 4 pages. Then 85.20 to 86.31, the trial of Festy King, the assailant, introduced. And the final section that we read there is from 86.32 to 90.33, evidence from a medical witness. So as we carry on, we'll hear more about Festy King in the next episode. But it's, there is structure. He is definitely telling a story, but whether or not the story is accessible to us, it's tough to know. So that is all the time we have for Wake for this week. This has been a supersized episode, but there's been lots of really interesting things to talk about, and our expertise from Dr. Natalie Hoskins has been wonderful and really appreciated. So for more chaotic brain noise, join us next week where we'll continue our exploration. I've been Toby Malone, joined by TJ Young, and I would like to once again thank Dr. Natalie Hoskins for joining us today. Thank you, Nat.
Thank you. It was great.
We'll see you next week for the second half of Chapter 1-4 with another very special guest. See you then, sadists. This has been Wake, a cold reading of James Joyce's Finnegans Wake, just to hear it out loud. If you've made it this far, thank you for your dedication. Join us next week for another segment of Finnegans Wake and a chat about what we've found. Wake is a Moon Street Media podcast, engineered by TJ Young and Toby Malone. Our theme song is The Ballad of Percy O'Reilly, arranged and performed by Meg Logue after James Joyce. Wake is recorded in Canada, where Finnegans Wake is in the public domain. For community and bonus content, join us at our free Patreon at patreon.com/wakepod. If you have questions about Finnegans Wake, don't ask us. We're just as confused as you are. See you next week.